Hello everybody! Today I'm going to look at the 101 different ways to install Proxmox. This is Stef from Samayas and welcome to my channel. Are there really 101 ways to install Proxmox? Well, not really, but rather figuratively speaking. But then again, it's a matter of how you count and quantize things, right? There are 4 distinct ways of installing Proxmox based on the file system choices. There are 11 distinct ways of installing Proxmox if you include the disk options. There are 35 distinct options if you include them all, so that's still quite a lot. Let's look at the boot choices first. When booting, first I have 3 distinct choices when using my Dell R630. I have the Graphical Way, I have the Terminal UI way, and I have the Terminal UI way with Serial Console. And of course, I have the advanced options. However, when doing the same thing when using a VMware workstation, the Terminal UI way Serial Console wasn't presented and is hidden in the advanced options. So when using Graphical Way, you have a fancy UI and keyboard and mouse is functioning. In general, you will use this on smaller systems who don't have any advanced remoting options and where you do need to connect keyboard and mouse and screen to see what's happening. On more modern servers, if you really want to sit next to a loud and hot server, you could do that as well, of course. However, if you have a physical KVM, which you can remotely administer, or a virtual KVM like an iDRAC, you can do that also remotely by still using the Graphical Way. The next mode is a text mode. Of course, here we have no fancy UI and no mouse. But this installer is faster, but less fancy, of course. It might be a better choice for the older machines, or if you're in a scenario where you still have a remote KVM, aka an iDRAC, but you have some bandwidth limits. And then finally we have the text mode with Serial Console. Here again we have a text mode with only keyboard and no mouse, but the whole of the UI output is redirected to a Serial Console. That might be a physical Serial Console, or that might be a Serial Console over a LAN port, which you could then access remotely through using an IPMI tool, for instance. Now let's look at the advanced options. In the boot menu, when selecting the advanced options, you have a little bit more options. Even though some options were or are not active on your system, you can still choose those. For instance, the Terminal UI mode with a Serial Console redirect on a virtual machine. In the advanced options, we also have the Proxmox automated version. And this allows us to install Proxmox fully automated by using a config file. If you only have one Proxmox server, you can do everything manually. But if you need to install 5, 10, 20 or 100 servers, you will go this route, of course. However, this requires more infrastructure to be in place to achieve this. This might also require comparable hardware for the disk choices. But if you install a many number of servers, in general, the hardware is quite comparable. I'll have a look at the Proxmox automated install in another video. If for whatever reason we have a Proxmox that has failed, then with the Rescue Boot menu option, we can try to recover the Proxmox. The test memory, as its name implies, will test your system memory and detect any issues you might have. You might resort to this option after you have random system crashes. This is comparable to the tests available in the Lifecycle Manager, but not all systems have a Lifecycle Manager. And then finally, depending on the system you have, you might even have a UEFI settings directly from the advanced menu. This of course can also be found in the BIOS settings, even though the graphical and the text versions give you quite a different install experience. In the end, none of them have any impact on the installed version whatsoever. The next big choice are the different disk choices and file type systems. I guess 70% of the installs will just be on one disk. On my Dell R630, I installed Proxmox on my internal USB drive. On my more recent Dell R6415, I installed Proxmox on my BOS card. If you have a BOS card type of system, you can go for 1 or 2 NVMe drives, which allows for RAID 0 or RAID 1. In general, those drives are quite small, but large enough to host the OS, but not the virtual machines. The disk choices we need to make when installing only impact the OS drive. So we have 4 distinct file types. We have ext4, we have XFS, we have ZFS, and we have BTRFS. So ext4 is short for 4 Extended File System and is a widely used journaling file system for Linux and is a default for Proxmox. Journaling keeps a log of changes to help recover from crashes. It's backward compatible and can easily read X2 and 3 drives, but in the Proxmox case, that isn't really important. It uses delay allocation, which improves performance by delaying block allocation. However, when you're not on UPS, that might cause some issues when there's a power outage, since not all data might already be written to disk. But if your server is in a data center, there's always a UPS. Extending files is managed efficiently when, for instance, you need to make a VM disk image larger. It supports larger files, larger than 16 TB, for those really large VMs everybody's using every day, of course. It has faster file checks than X3, and you can easily online resize an image, even when it's mounted, should that be needed. So what are the pros of X4? Simplicity and stability on the most mature and widely tested file system in Linux. It's stable and reliable. It has a low resource usage and uses a lot less RAM and CPU than ZFS. Its performance is good for most workloads, especially with SSDs and small to medium-sized VMs. It has a broad compatibility for almost all Linux tools and backup utilities. Unlike ZFS, you don't need special ARC memory or tuning. What are the cons of X4? There's no native support for snapshots unless you use LVM10 or QCOW2. There's no built-in deduplication or compression like ZFS. There's a weaker data integrity since no checksums or recovery. Disk corruption can't be recovered. There is no built-in replication and only static configuration, and no way to set quotas and reservations or other advanced features. So what are the options when we choose X4? First, we can choose the hard disk size used. We could use the full physical disk, or we could make the volume smaller if we want to. The swap size allows us to specify the swap partition needed. The default here is 4 GB, but that depends on the RAM of the system. Personally, for a Proxmox server, I don't want any swapping, and it's my responsibility to allocate the right amount of physical RAM to the machine I want to use. So you can easily set this to 0. The max root is the maximum file size allocated for the root directory of Proxmox. This depends, of course, on the disk you are installing it on. But if your disk is large enough, the default will be 96 GB. In general, you don't need more than 64 GB, but that might change in the future. The min-free space is a space that is kept free and unallocated for use in an LVM volume groups. This is by default 4 GB, but this again depends on the OS physical disk on which you install, and it will also store LVMs. The max VZ is the maximum size allocated for containers and other storage. The default uses the remainder of the available space on a selected disk. This is where containers, ISOs, and backups or templates might be stored, but you might also put them on another disk. Next, we have XFS. So what is XFS? XFS is a high-performance 64-bit journaling file system. It's best used for high-speed and large volume workloads, where snapshotting and checksumming are not priorities. It's very stable, it's very fast and ideal for backups, ISOs and large VM image storage. So this would rather be used for other volumes rather than the OS install, even though it's possible. XFS is designed for high performance with large file and heavy I/O. The extend base allocation reduces fragmentations by allocating large chunks of disk space at once. The journaling keeps a log of metadata changes to protect against the file system corruption after a crash. The online resize allows you to grow, but not to shrink the file system when it's in use. The parallel I/O allows multi-threaded design to perform well on multi-core systems. And the huge file and volume support is in the petabytes or exabyte range. Something every home user has, of course, right? So what are the pros of XFS? High performance for large files, ideal for media server backup storage and large VMs. Scalable and maturity is proven through high performance in the enterprise world with excellent scalability on large volumes and file systems. There is efficient space allocation used with reduced fragmentation. There is a good metadata performance and a workload involving many metadata operations like heavy file creations and deletions. There is a fast recovery through journaling file system that ensures fast recovery after crashes. It maintains performance over time on long-lived and heavy-use disks. So what are the cons of XFS? XFS doesn't support snapshots like ZFS. This makes it less flexible for VM and container rollback integration. XFS lacks built-in support for compression and so might use more storage. ZFS doesn't have checksum and bitrot protection. If data corruption occurs, it won't be auto-repairable or detected. ZFS is not self-replicating like ZFS. So what are the ZFS options? So when we choose the ZFS options, we have the following options. They're basically the same as for ZFS. First, we can choose the hard disk size used. We could use the full physical disk, or we could make the volume smaller if we want to. The swap size allows us to specify the swap partition needed. The default here is 4 GB, but that depends on the RAM of your system. The max root is the max file size allocated for the root directory of Proxmox. This depends, of course, on the disk you are installing it on. But if your disk is large enough, the default will be 96 GB. In general, you don't need more than 64 GB. But that might change in the future. The min free space is the space that is kept free and unallocated for use for the LVM volume groups. This is by default set to 4 GB, but this again depends if the OS physical disk will also store other VMs or not. The max VZ is the maximum size allocated for containers and other storage. The default uses the remainder of the space available on the selected disk. This is where you store containers, ISOs, backup and templates, but you can also store them on another disk if you want to. Next we have ZFS. So what is ZFS? ZFS is a combined file system and volume manager designed for data integrity, high performance and scalability. The integrated file and volume manager manages both the disk layout and the file system. No need for an LVM or a separate partitioning. The COW or copy on write data is never overwritten in place. Every write creates a new block version. The checksumming ensures that every block is validated in case of corruption, and with redundancy can be repaired. The instant snapshots allows for cloning of VMs or containers or datasets in a space-efficient way. There is a built-in RAID based on the type you chose, and no external RAID controller is required anymore. On-the-fly compression can be enabled to save space. Deduplication is also available, but is memory intensive. High I/O performance is good for virtual machines workload, especially on SSDs. High I/O performance is good for virtual machine workloads, especially on SSDs. And it has a self-healing capacity through the use of RAID. So what are the pros of ZFS? Data integrity on any block is checksummed and verified, preventing silent data corruption. Instance and space-efficient snapshots and clones for VMs and containers. Backup and replication has minimal impact. ZFS supports native replication to another node or backup server. ZFS supports transparent compression and so can save space. COW or copy on write ensures consistent snapshots and prevent in-place data overwrite. Built-in RAID removes the need for a hardware RAID controller. It pairs perfectly with Proxmox backup server for duplication. We have great tooling for ZFS pools and lists. So what are the cons of ZFS? ZFS is using a considerable amount of memory with a minimum of 8 GB, but it might be 3 or 4 times more than that. ZFS requires complex tuning like ZIL, slog devices. Misconfiguration can lead to performance or stability issues. Booting from ZFS is supported but can be tricky, especially with UEFI and/or legacy BIOS setups and mirrors. ZFS volumes can over-provision storage but require careful management to avoid filling the pool. On ZFS system with less than 8 memory or very limited CPU, ZFS might cause performance issues. Some third-party tools or hypervisors might not fully support ZFS without workarounds. So what are the ZFS options? A-shift sets the block size exponent. This typically relates to the physical sector size of the disk. Common values are 9 for 512 blocks or 12 for 4K blocks. Modern SSD should use 12 or 4K. In Proxmox, based on the disks, this is auto-detected. The compression option allows you on-the-fly compression of the data written to a pool. Options are on or off or LZ4, which is fast and efficient, and a default, or gzip, which has a high compression but is slower. Then there's also ZSTD, which is a more modern compression. The checksum option enables block-level checksumming for data integrity and is on by default, but can be disabled. It's not advised to disable it. The number of copies specify the number of copies each data block that is stored to a pool should have. The default is 1. The more number of copies, of course, the more disk space you are required. You should only use 2 copies in case of critical data. The arc max size option sets a maximum size of the arc, which is the advanced replication cache, which in ZFS is a RAM caching system. The default behavior is automatically sized and usually takes up to 50% of the RAM. The HD size specifies the total disk size of the volume created. By default it is auto-detected and it takes up maximum space. And finally we have the BTRFS. BTRFS is short for B3 file system. It is still in experimental stage on Proxmox. It is a modern COW or copy on write file system designed for Linux. It is designed to address the shortcomings of traditional file system like ext4. It's known for its rich feature set focused on data integrity, scalability and administrative simplicity. COW features make sure that all data and metadata are written in that fashion, which improves data integrity and enables fast snapshotting and clones. Snapshot allows for a point-in-time copy of the file system or subvolumes, which is done instantly. And subvolumes allows for logical partitioning, which can be managed independently. BTRFS checksums both data and metadata using CRC32C, which immediately detects any potential data corruptions. There is integrated RAID support for RAID 0, 1, 10, 5 and 6. Compression can be zlib, LZO or ZSTD, which improves disk usage and I/O performance. And online resizing is also possible. So what are the pros of BTRFS? First, we have lightweight snapshotting, which allows for quick VM rollbacks to point of a backup and save for upgrades or testing. Built-in compression helps speed I/O operations and reduces size. BTRFS can send incremental changes between snapshots, just like ZFS, which is ideal for offsite replication and incremental backups. There's no memory overhead, which is the case with ZFS. Out of the box, there's integrated RAID support at file system level. There's checksumming and data integrity checks throughout. So what are the cons of BTRFS? BTRFS snapshots only work for the LXC containers and not for the full VMs. RAID 5 and 6 is still in experimental stage and is considered unsafe. RAID 1 and 10 are stable. There is weaker tooling tools available for recovery in case of issues. Compared to ZFS, copy on write can hurt write performance, especially with databases on VM disk images. It is less mature than ZFS and less tested, especially in RAID scrubbing snapshot and replication scenarios. There's no native deduplication and that can only be done offline with third-party tools. Now let's look at the BTRFS options. First we have the hard disk size, which is automatically filled in. Next we have compression. This is enabled by default and typically uses ZSTD, but zlib and LZO are also available. So after having selected one of the 4 file types, depending on the choices we have made, we can choose one or more disks for that file system. When installing ext4 on Proxmox, there's only one disk available to select. In a lot of scenarios, this will be installed on a BOS card or on USB stick. When installing XFS on Proxmox, there's only one disk available. So if we want to have a huge volume, we should use a RAID controller underneath. It is disadvised to use XFS as a Proxmox OS file system. For ZFS, we have loads of different options. First, we have single disk. Then we have the RAID 0, which is striping. 2 disks are used. This is faster, but if one disk fails, all is lost. Then we have the mirror, which is RAID 1. 2 disks that are cloned. Next we have the RAID 10, which is a combination of RAID 0 and RAID 1. 2 disks for speed and another 2 disks for security. We can lose 2 disks without losing anything. But of course, we lose in space. Next we have RAID Z1, which is single parity, which is comparable to RAID 5. It requires at least 3 disks, but in general we have 4, and 1 disk can be lost. Next we have RAID Z2, which is double parity. It is comparable to RAID Z6. It requires at least 3 disks and 2 disks for parities, and 2 disks can be lost. And then finally we have RAID Z3, which is triple parity. It requires at least 4 disks and 3 disks for parity, and so 3 disks can be lost. For BTRFS, we have the following options. Then we have RAID 0, which is striping. 2 disks are used. This is faster, but if one disk fails, all is lost. Then we have mirror, which is RAID 1. 2 disks are used that are cloned. Next, we have RAID 10, which is a combination of RAID 0 and RAID 1. 2 disks for speed and another 2 disks for security. We can lose 2 disks without losing anything. But of course, we lose space. After having done all the disk options, next we have to enter the regional settings. Here you can enter the country and the time zone and the keyboard layout. Unfortunately, in my case, I always have issues. I want an AZERTY keyboard, and whatever I select, I was never able to have the correct keyboard layout. If I select Dutch, I do have an AZERTY keyboard, but the numbers are wrong. If I select French, the numbers are right, but it's not AZERTY. Even after having installed, I was never able to fix this. And this matters when you telnet or SSH into your server. Next, we need to enter the password and email address. The email will be used to send warning messages of your Proxmox. Of course, in a later phase, for that to work, you need to configure an SMTP server. And finally, we can choose a network card, the host name and the IP address. Proxmox will detect the network cards that do have an active cable and show you through a green LED which card is active if your system has more than one card. For servers, in general, that's mostly the case. It will also try to pre-configure through DHCP the IP address and DNS of your server. The rest of the process is just simply plain install status. Since this video is already quite long, I will just include basic terminal UI over serial and the graphical way, and loop through all the available options. I'll upload a number of separate videos, which you have the full install process shown type by type. And this is very text-based. I choose I agree. As my target hard drive, I will choose my first drive. As you can see here, I have 4 SAS drives of 1.1 terabyte, more or less. I have in the front also an SSD drive in Tenso. I have an internal USB stick, which is 120 gigabytes, and I have a flash drive in the back as well. For speed, I'll choose my SSD drive, and I have advanced options as well. As you can see in the advanced options, you can change the file system. For now, I'll leave it to ext4. The next options are the total disk size. I'll leave it at the max size. Next we have the swap size, which I leave by default. Then we have the maximum root volume size, the maximum data volume size, and a minimum free LVM space. I also leave them default. And I choose next. I choose my country. I leave the time zone. And since I want an AZERTY keyboard and the closest thing that I found, I choose Dutch. And the next step, I enter a password. And I enter an email address. And here in network settings, he already found through DHCP the IP address assigned to this machine. And if we also go into networking devices, currently there's only one network device enabled, but I have 4. Choose next. I get a little overview and the install continues. And so the back screen still has the GUI and the IPMI has full text-based. And of course I'm choosing terminal UI with serial console. And at some point my back screen and my iDRAC will stop feeding me with info and everything will pass through the IPMI tool. So my iDRAC stopped transmitting me data. I accept the license agreement, and here the text screen becomes a little bit flaky. I need to use a tab. Selecting the right option wasn't that easy, so I select my SSD drive and I leave ext for now. Next I need to change my country. Again, it's a little bit more guessing which line exactly is selected and which isn't, but it still works. And now I try to select a Dutch keyboard. Next I need to provide a password and change to valid email. And finally, again, the network is not correct. I need first to select the correct network card. A little dot indicates the valid one. I need to change the host name. Enter a valid IP address and gateway and DNS server. I get a little overview, and now the hardest work is done. And we choose the GUI, and the GUI process is a little bit slower than the text process. And so first I agree, and now I can choose my target disk, which I want to install on. I have 4 SAS disk, I have an SSD disk, I have an internal USB stick, and I have a second USB stick in the back. So first I select the SAS drive. If I go to options and I leave it on ext4, it automatically selects the hard disk size. I can choose a swap size, the max root size, the min free, and the max VZ. If I switch to ZFS, it stays the same. I have the hard disk size, the swap size, the max root size, the min free, and the max VZ. If I switch to RAID 0 on ZFS, it changes completely, because now I need to choose the disks that I want for my RAID 0. I choose the first, and then the second, and all the other I set to do not use. And now I have selected 2 disks for my RAID 0, and in the advanced options I have the A shift, which is automatically set to 12. I have compression on or off, or STD, gzip, LZ4, etc. I can enable checksum. I can even choose which checksum, SHA-265 or Fletcher 4. I can choose the number of copies I want, 1, 2 or 3. Only use 2 for very important data. I can choose the ARC max size, and I can choose the hard disk size depending on the disk I've chosen. This option stays the same for Red Z1. The advanced option stays the same for everything which is ZFS. If we go to BTRFS and we go to advanced options, we only have compression off, on, zlib, zstd, lzo, and we can choose the hard disk size. And the disk setup again is the same. We can choose a number of disks, 2 disks for RAID 0, 4 disks for RAID 10. So now I choose next. He asks me for a country, he enters in the correct time zone, and since I want an RZT keyboard, I choose Dutch. Then I have the next screen. I need to enter a password, I need to confirm it, and I need to enter an email address. And finally, I have the network settings. It shows me the number of interfaces. I choose the 4th interface, which is active. This time DHCP did not work. I enter the correct IP address, and I enter the DNS name. I don't know why there's a difference between the text mode where DHCP is working and the graphical interface where I need to manually enter it, but apparently that's the case. And I choose next, I get a little overview, and it starts installing. As you have seen, installing Proxmox still has a lot of options. Some have an impact, some don't. Changing the password, regional settings and email address is possible. However, changing the disk type requires installation. Also, depending on the system and disk in that system, some options might be better suited than others. Selecting ZFS requires a lot of overhead, which is an important consideration. Personally, I'm using ZFS on my NAS, but not on my Proxmox. If you guys enjoy this content, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell sign. Or leave a comment down below.